So this is me, 4 years ago, playing Final Fantasy XIV for the first time. I was new, scared, timid, even lonely, except for my friend Sorrel.
Hello.
I always had my friend Sorrel. And just look at me now, 4 years later, a time where I become a hero, a savior of Eorzea. I'm constantly surrounded by cat girls and girls and buff girls and tall girls and bunny girls and dragon girls and lion girls. And Sorrel is still here 4 years later. Hi Sorrel, how are you?
I'm still alive.
And as a veteran Final Fantasy XIV player of 4 years, I am here to answer this question. Should you play Final Fantasy XIV? In this video, we're gonna talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between to help you understand if Final Fantasy XIV is the game for you. But before we begin, I just have to remind you that if during this video you get the slightest little tickle, the slightest inkling, that feeling that you want to try Final Fantasy XIV, that this game has a generous free trial. I'm obligated to read this. One moment, please. Thank you. Have you heard of the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with an expanded free trial, which you can now play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn and the award-winning Heavensward expansion? Here's the addendum. Also now including the very much, in my opinion, slept-on Stormblood expansion, up to level 70 for free, with no restrictions on playtime. Done. So basically, if you were playing at the pace that I was playing at, going through these expansions, and I was just kind of focused on the main story quest, by the way, which is just one aspect of this game. It's a major aspect, but only one aspect. You could get like 3, 4, 5, maybe half a year's worth of playtime, all for free. At the very least, it's a no pressure way for you to dip your toes into the game and really test out if Final Fantasy XIV is the game for you. Okay, I'm done. Editing Kev, take it away.
Thank you, Minikev. While Final Fantasy XIV has all the makings of any MMO that you may be used to, from quests to crafting and gathering, dungeons, PvP, endgame raids, and community or player-driven events, it doesn't necessarily play like your typical MMO. And while Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG, you may have heard it described as an RPG MMO, because the bulk of your main progression in this game, your leveling experience per se, is centered around the main story quest, or MSQ for short. That's not to say that people only play this game for the story. There are plenty of players who don't care for the story at all, but enjoy the many other aspects this game has to offer, such as the challenging yet awesome raids and boss fights that keep players coming back for more, yet raids and boss fights that still exist to serve the story in some way. But I just wanted to make that clear. One of the biggest draws of this game is the story, and pretty much everything is gated behind MSQ progression to various extents. Many MMOs are known for their end game. The real game starts at the end, right? Not quite the case in 14. This MMO is very much centered around the journey to endgame, and when you get there, it's not necessarily just raiding for folks. 14 has a great raid scene, but there's a lot more that players might get into than you would expect. So right off the bat, if you're somebody who is familiar with the Final Fantasy series, or you're somebody who loves engaging with an epic narrative, one that has an actual ending to a decade-long story and is currently setting the stage for the next saga, this may be your sign to try Final Fantasy XIV. But let me tell you a little bit more about how this progression really works. You gotta start in A Realm Reborn, or as veteran players will typically say, you gotta get through A Realm Reborn. Alright, let's talk about the progression and the story. Now, I had a blast in A Realm Reborn, ARR, the base game for Final Fantasy XIV. I'm not saying you can't have fun in ARR, but it's old, it shows some age, and the story may feel like it takes some time to truly get poppin'. So how does the story progression work? Just hear me out. It's gonna sound a bit bland, then it's gonna sound a bit good. Do you like reading? Oi, venturer, over here! Cause you got a lot of text bubbles. How about more text bubbles? There's text bubbles out the wazoo. So many text bubbles. You want to read? Here's text bubbles. Here's another text bubble. And when you think you're done with the text bubbles, you get
another one.
Yeah, sorry. If you thought the main progression was gonna be go to this area and kill 10 of this mob, you're wrong. It's mostly go to this area and talk to this NPC who will probably send you back to the area you were just in to talk to the original NPC who sent you to the second NPC, and then you're gonna go to another area to talk to a third NPC, rinse and repeat. And none of this really changes, even after A Realm Reborn. So what keeps me around? Why am I still here playing this point and click adventure? It's because this is an epic ass story, and I am fully invested. I love this story, but it's the epitome of stick around for another season because it gets really good. And in between the lulls of all this dialogue, when it feels like all you're doing is trimming away the fat, at its core, there's something legendary. These moments of high stakes, climax, and conclusion that for me make the journey worth it. You got voice acting. The cast is great. Their performances are fantastic. Quick warning, what you hear in A Realm Reborn changes and becomes a permanent cast in Heavensward, the first expansion. Their voice acting combined with the all-around good quality writing found throughout the game, plus the wonderful music accompaniment that you could expect from a Final Fantasy game, brings life to these moments and experiences. The entire world just feels connected to the story in so many ways. The fact that we can be posed with a question or a cliffhanger in an early expansion only to have a fulfilling conclusion or payoff in a later expansion is very much appreciated actually. I'm definitely trying to avoid spoilers here, so as much as I want to talk about it, I'm not going to talk about the story anymore. It's something you need to experience for yourself if interested. So in between talking to NPCs and listening to wonderfully voiced narrative and exposition, what are we doing? Well, you got solo duties. These are playable and most of the time action-oriented single-player events that happen to progress the story. You got dungeons, your typical group content shenanigans. You go in as a team of 4. You got trial fights. These are 8-player boss fights, just the boss, no dungeon. These are all here to heighten the highs and highlight the lows of our journey. And I don't mean lows as in this part of the game was bad. I mean lows as in this is a proper adventure. It's going to try to make you feel some things. We'll get into this later, but there are a plethora of optional PvE or supplementary normal raid series and alliance raid series to participate in. These don't necessarily progress the main story, but these side stories definitely tie into the MSQ to varying degrees and play a large role in the world building of Final Fantasy XIV. Here's a level 15 to 30 MSQ list pretty early on in the game. This doesn't list the solo duties originally, so I'm gonna plug these in myself with this yellow highlight, but you can see how when it comes to actiony things to do like dungeons or boss fights, it's kind of sparse in between. There's long stretches of narrative and then boom, you got something big or important to play through. Here's a quest list from level 72 to 73. Many expansions later, the cadence remains similar. Long stretches of narrative broken up by action. And that's not to say that there isn't anything important going on in these sparse bits. That is far from the truth, especially if you're somebody who is engaged with the story. But gameplay wise, it's a lot of reading and being read too. But if you're somebody who is not interested in the story at all, and who knows, maybe this is the narrative that finally grabs your attention, continue to hear me out, because we're going to talk about a lot more gameplay-oriented aspects of 14 moving forward. Combat, classes, the open world, dungeons, trials, raids, alliance raids, and endgame raiding. Combat. Here's how the combat and class system works. In 14, we have the familiar tab targeting system. There is a global cooldown of 2.5 seconds, which might feel slow for some players. For reference, I think WoW has a 1.5 global cooldown, while some MMOs don't have any at all. And of course, 14 has a plethora of off global cooldown abilities to use in between the standard GCD or global cooldown. Every job has its own unique gauge that's built up and used to unleash powerful abilities tailored to that job's kit, and the animations are pretty cool across the board. They can be really big and bright, and oftentimes there's a lot going on the screen. But there are settings to limit the amount of animations you see from yourself or from other players. I would say that there's a bit of hotbar bloat going on by the time you reach the end game. Like, I'd have to think about how I would organize things when they introduce new skills and abilities moving forward. And for the people interested in raiding, and to the chagrin of some current players, the combat currently revolves around a 2-minute window, basically a burst window where everyone is using their big buffs and damage abilities only to cycle and build up for the next 2-minute window again. But as you'll see as we get into some of the group content this game has to offer, I think there's enough here to keep you engaged throughout fights. And the major boss fights throughout dungeons, trials, and raids are really fun. They're often described as a dance because the boss will go through a scripted cadence that doesn't change, but don't let this fool you, these are still very challenging and fun to progress, especially when fresh. More on this later. Classes or jobs. As of writing this, there are 21 main combat jobs, each divided into one of 3 classic hierarchies: tanks, healers, and DPS. DPS could be segmented further down into melee, physical ranged, and magic DPS. The beauty of Final Fantasy XIV is you can level up every single job on one character. That's right, no alt characters needed, just switch up your main weapon with the click of a button out of combat or out of instance, and in an instant, boom, different job. Now what's cool here is every job has its own little story to progress through in order to unlock and learn certain new abilities, with these job quests becoming available when you reach certain levels. This continues on for a couple of expansions. Final Fantasy XIV is a game that tries its best to balance and make every job as accessible as possible, which comes with its pros and cons. There are no talent trees in this game, something I felt a bit divided about when I first started playing. On one hand, it does feel like there's a certain uniqueness missing from the jobs I play and their playstyle, as everyone else using that job is pretty much playing the exact same way. On the other hand, in a world with talent trees, I do remember metas forming anyway, basically forcing people to play a certain style depending on the type of content they were doing. The homogenization of jobs doesn't stop there. One of the benefits of this is that unless you're doing day 1, week 1, race for world first types of endgame raiding, pretty much any job can clear the endgame content this game has to offer, even though some jobs still tend to perform better than others consistently. I don't have a ton of experience playing multiple jobs in endgame raiding. I mostly just play the Dark Knight here, which is a tank, but I have heard from other tank players, for example, that all 4 tanks available in this game kind of feel the same to play. Like there's that missing uniqueness between each one. And because of how these jobs are designed and that 2-minute window I mentioned earlier, what came first, the chicken or the egg, you'll find the playstyle across the board to be fairly similar between all jobs. I'm trying to find the best way I can to describe this, but instead of like reacting to certain situations, jobs in 14 are built around proactive combo building. We're pressing buttons in a certain sequence in order to build up a gauge or to unleash something at the end of a combination. For like almost every single job, the first skills that you learn is something of a 1, 2, 3 combination. And I did mention the developers trying to make jobs more accessible. One of the prime examples of this is a more recent change to the Black Mage, a magic range DPS. The Black Mage was a job hailed for its difficulty to pick up and perform at a consistent level, but if you were able to do so, it's one that had a high skill ceiling type of playstyle. I've heard mixed opinions on the new Black Mage changes, which essentially made it easier to play while still outputting incredible amounts of damage. While some players enjoy the feeling of this new system, others don't appreciate how this job was basically stripped of its challenging playstyle identity, making it feel the same as any other job out there. At the risk of sounding too critical here, just know I've had plenty of fun with the plethora of jobs I played throughout casual, raiding, and PvP environments. This is just kind of the nitty-gritty of discussion you might see or be made aware of the longer and deeper you dive into any game. But if you're like me, there's a lot to enjoy here without getting bogged down into the minor details. As mentioned, I love tanking as a Dark Knight in raid settings, but every now and then I'll throw in some melee DPS with the Viper. For more casual content, I'll do some warrior tanking, some white mage or astrologian for healing, and some machinist for the pew pew. And because of the accessibility of these jobs, I'm able to pick these up and learn new ones whenever I want. This is actually the first MMO where I've taken a liking to melee jobs. I've always considered myself more of a ranged kind of player, but here I actually prefer melee, especially in PvP settings. There's just something about it that feels really good to me. The open world, or the overworld. The open world of 14 is what you'll be traveling through as you progress the story, and I use the term open world kind of ironically because these are instance-based areas. It's not one huge interconnected, freely passable massive land. You have to zone into each one. Now, the zones themselves are very pretty. They look great in my opinion, but due to the nature of progression in this game, they always felt a bit hollow to me. Progressing the story itself is enough to level up one of your jobs to max. And aside from progressing the story, I find myself not really doing much in these zones. Sure, there's mobs scattered about, but they're definitely more of a hindrance. There are a bunch of fates, or dynamic scenarios and battles found around the map, as well as a plethora of side quests, but I never really found myself or other players participating in them. Aside from some of these major fates, which are straight up boss fights in the open world, these are actually really cool. In this area, for example, I remember doing a full-on fate quest chain of sorts. Like there was an entire little story based around completing a fate, which would unlock the next scenario, so on and so forth, with an actual conclusion to it. Like there's definitely some depth here, but kind of little incentive for me to do it. The best juxtaposition I can provide for this, based off my personal MMO experience, is, say, the Barrens in World of Warcraft. The Barrens is a zone filled with tons of quests, and due to the nature of progression in WoW, these are quests that players will engage with in order to level up. In turn, they become a lot more intimate with the area, spending tons of time in every nook and cranny. In 14, I'm kind of just going to an area to progress the story, you know, talk to some people, and then I'm out of there and not really coming back to revisit. That being said, the minor amount of side quests that I have done showed a lot of promise. Some of them were funny as hell, other ones really emotional, tying back into the main story in some way. What you're seeing on screen is a hunt train, a community effort to defeat special ranked mobs in any given zone. When events like this happen, it does make the open world feel more active. So when I say the world feels hollow, I'm talking about from a gameplay perspective in general, but that could also just be a product of my playstyle in 14. I can't stress enough how gorgeous these zones look, and I know the developers have been making an effort to add little details into the world to help it feel that much more alive. There's definitely some quality stuff there, but I'm just not spending time in these zones doing side quests to level up because it would be more efficient for me to do something like a dungeon instead. Dungeons. And speaking of dungeons, I love the dungeons in 14. That being said, they are very linear, as opposed to, say, a Wailing Caverns in World of Warcraft, where it feels more like a dungeon crawl. Dungeons in 14 are formulaic. Like, you know you're gonna get 2 big trash pools before a boss, but as per usual, the dungeons are here to serve the story. They can feel very cinematic at times, especially when you're getting straight up cutscenes, voice acting, and very relevant story moments unfolding within these dungeons. A lot of dungeons are required to progress the story, but there's a large collection of optional dungeons and stories to unlock. This is a 4-person piece of content, 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. The devs are definitely trying to make these more accessible for solo players via the duty support and trust systems. These are basically systems that allow you to go into these dungeons with NPC allies. This does mean it tends to take a bit longer to complete a run, and I don't think it's available for every dungeon, but they're constantly adding to this functionality as the updates roll in. So that is an option if you're one to shy away from other players. But being an MMO, I would implore you to embrace the social aspect of the genre and get comfortable with playing with other players, because you're gonna have to at some point. We'll talk more about this later, but the community surrounding Final Fantasy XIV is overall very good. Trials. Let's talk about trials, 8-man boss fights. Many of them are a requirement to progress the story, but there are optional ones bucketed together that tell their own story. These are really cool fights. It's just you and 7 other players against 1 boss, no dungeon, no trash mobs, die, you wipe, you respawn back into the arena, ready for another pull. An added bonus, these main story relevant ones are often climactic and just really awesome to be a part of, especially when it's someone in your party's first time and you know that this fight is a pivotal moment in the story. And the optional ones, there's some good stories there for sure. And Gundams, you're gonna want to do the Gundams. You probably noticed it through some of the footage by now, but this trial footage is a great example of how combat works in 14. Remember what I mentioned about it feeling like a dance? You'll continue to see more footage like this as we progress through the other PvE types. Normal raids. Not to be confused with endgame raiding, but we're getting there, don't worry. Normal raids are optional, they have their own story to follow, but they're still relevant to the main story to varying degrees. Think of normal raids as a collection of trials, so 8 players per fight, each one that you complete progresses that story. By the time an expansion ends, there would be 12 total fights available, released in 3 tiers of 4 that make up the entire normal raid series. Even though these are optional, I highly recommend you check them out. There's a ton of dope fights, and if you're a story buff, there's some really good stuff there as well. What you kind of get in these trial fights and normal raids here is accessibility for a wide range of players. If you're curious about raiding but never raided before, or you're somebody who's really trying to learn and get better at the combat in 14, maybe you're like me and just really never paid attention or made the effort to improve while progressing the story, these are great places to start to learn mechanics and tells, you know, all these glowy bits on the floor. Once you really start paying attention, you'll realize there's a rhyme or reason to every boss animation, sound, the environment and floor markers, attack names and attack icons, or just go do the Hall of the Novice. I hear they're buffing that up to help people understand how to play this game. I wouldn't know. I haven't done the Hall of the Novice. I still don't know how to play this game. Alliance raids. Alliance raids are 99% optional, but there's one that you have to do to progress the story. These are 24-person raids in a dungeon-style environment, so instead of just spawning into an arena with the boss, you gotta fight your way to that arena first. Rinse and repeat a couple times. Each expansion contains 3 Alliance raids to progress through, and yes, there's a story involved, and yes, while not directly needed to progress the main story, they can still be really relevant to varying degrees. These are a blast. I love content that involves a large number of players. This scratches the itch. There's a lot of really cool Alliance raid designs. I love the hecticness of having 24 people in a fight. Not super difficult, but a ton of fun. Endgame raiding. We are finally here. This is for you endgame raiders who enjoy a challenge. What are we working with here? We're basically taking what we just talked about, the trials, the normal raids, and even alliance raids now, and turning these up a notch, all while adding a new type of raid that I'll share after. So trials become extreme trials, normal raids become savage raids, and alliance raids become chaotic raids. And while we kind of are rehashing the same boss, the fights here are very different and challenging. It's a whole host of new mechanics and cadences. Extremes are your starting point for raiding. These are very clearable and a great place for newer raiders to get their feet wet. This is also where you get the raiding mount for that expansion as well. Savage is what most people think of when you talk about raiding in 14, and just like the normal raid series, by the end of the expansion, you will have 12 Savage fights available to clear. Now, since Savages are released in 3 tiers of 4 throughout an expansion, the difficulty or approachability of each one can vary depending on the tier. For example, as of writing this, the most recent Savage tier has proven to be one of the more difficult ones that I've seen during my time playing the game. So the time to clear can vary quite a bit, depending on you as a player, the difficulty of the tier, and your group. Chaotic Alliance raids are a new thing. As of writing this, there exists only one Chaotic Alliance raid in the game thus far. This current one is a multi-phase fight, just full of chaos, as the name implies, due to the 24 player count. This was actually a lot of fun. I'm excited to see what they develop for this in the future. Now we get to the creme de la creme of ultimate challenges for raiders, introducing ultimate raids. These are the pinnacle of difficulty and prestige offered in this game. Each ultimate is basically 4 to 7 consecutive boss fights or phases on a probably higher than Savage skill level. Except for maybe one ultimate, there's no checkpoints. You wipe on the last fight or phase and you gotta start from the first one again. This probably equates to like 15 to 20 minutes of pure boss battling concentration that you need to be locked in for. So it really depends on the fight, but throughout all extremes, Savages, and Ultimate, there's definitely a certain degree of personal responsibility. Body check mechanics where if somebody is down, there's a high chance of wiping completely, or at least it makes it difficult to recover and meet the overall damage check. So already it takes a certain kind of raider to attempt these ultimates. I have a friend who's a high-end raider, loves this kind of stuff, and they're letting me know that on a ballpark level estimate that hardcore groups might clear a new ultimate in 1 to 2 weeks or less, but I'm talking like they're taking time off work to put in consecutive 12 to 16 hour days to learn and clear. And these are players that already show a high level of skill expression. It could take mid-core groups 2, 3, 4+ months to earn that clear. When I was younger, I was definitely more into raiding in, say, World of Warcraft. I'm pretty casual in 14, so typically I'll clear extremes pretty easily, and Savages is where I spend most of my time, if I choose to raid. But the beauty of 14 is, you don't have to raid at the endgame. There's plenty of other things to do, as you'll see. Grouping in Final Fantasy XIV. And just to cap things off, there are many different ways to find groups to do all of this content with in Final Fantasy XIV. There's a queuing system that incentivizes veterans to participate in. This is great to use for your regular dungeon trial, normal, and alliance raid type of shenanigans. For endgame content, a lot of raiders form their own personal groups with friends or people they meet, as you would in any other game, and these are called statics in 14. Not to be confused with guilds or free companies. We'll talk about that later though. But there's also the party finder system, where people can form groups with randoms based off certain criteria. Like I can create a party finder for this specific raid, I could determine certain requirements to join, like item level or job role, and I could write something in the description to help people understand what they need to know in order to join. I think these tendencies kind of vary by region. Here in North America, people tend to use the party finder, but I hear that in Japan, for example, they like to use the standard random queuing system for their raiding shenanigans. And if you want to tackle older content, older raids, there's ways you can queue into it with a whole host of variables. If you have a group, you can sync and go in and experience the difficulty of that fight as if it had just released via options that sync your level and gear score down. You can unsync and go in at your current level and decimate some of the old stuff if you want the rewards. Just noting that you can't unsync the fights in the current expansion, and you can never unsync an ultimate. Those remain untouched and forever a challenge. Gear progression and reward system. While we are fresh on the topic of raiding, let's talk about item progression and the reward system in this game. What I'm about to talk about is my own personal feelings surrounding it. Perhaps there's some better terminology to be used or found in other mediums of discussion, but this is the best way I can describe it based on my experience. I'm generally not really excited about obtaining new gear in this game. The gear progression is very linear. There's a clear next best thing to get and never really any adjacent options. Maybe it's also because of this gear score system. Back when I played WoW, there was no gear score, no item level, so I was basing my gearing decisions off certain stats and making choices in that way. And I'm sure this is how it is in modern MMOs and other games now, but with gear scores, I'm just auto-equipping the next highest number. Like, cool, it's a bigger number, let's move on. And it's not just for raiding. For other PvE and PvP modes, I feel like aside from sparse amounts of some cool aesthetic weapons and armor pieces, there's a lot of like really shitty or stingy rewards, added on top of what feels like a lack of powerful or relevant adjacent armor and weapon pieces. An example for this is the relic weapons found in this game. Relics are kind of endgame sort of grinds to obtain these really cool looking weapons. But from what I understand, the actual usefulness of these weapons doesn't really come into play until the very end of an expansion. For raiders, when a new Savage tier drops in the expansion, the previous tier's gear pretty much becomes moot. Like not even just from a power level standpoint or for even meeting the minimum requirements to enter the new tier, aside from maybe the first fight. So it kind of feels like all the time spent obtaining that raiding gear was for nothing, aside clearing the previous tier faster. Like there's no carryover, especially when serious raiders will start a new tier with crafted gear, which becomes the new best in slot. And there are other ways to obtain the necessary level raiding gear to enter and progress these new tiers. You have to spend certain currency to obtain that, but even this feels sluggish and really stingy based off the weekly accumulation caps. Maybe I'm just old. This is also my first committed MMO in a very long time, but these are my feelings about it, and I'm definitely more of a casual raider. Maybe some of the 14 veterans will be able to correct, confirm, deny, or expound upon these ideas in the comments. Other PvE, field operations. Okay, we talked a lot about the common PvE combat-oriented options that are often brought up in an MMO context, but 14 has some other substantial PvE modes to keep you busy. Field operations or exploration zones are large-scale instance areas that contain a number of battlefield duties or fates, boss fights, and raids, all connected by, of course, a story. There are 3 of these available in the game. They all operate somewhat differently, but also kind of similarly at the same time. They're similar because you're basically running around an instanced area, fighting mobs and bosses, participating in events, all while earning maybe a currency and experience. They're different because each zone has its own unique leveling system and new combat mechanics that pair up with the main combat jobs found outside these field ops, as well as their own pool of rewards. The nitty-gritty of what you're fighting and how you're fighting and their leveling systems are specific to whatever field operation you're in. These field operations are basically what I wish the open world of 14 was more like. Deep dungeons, Deep Dungeons are a roguelike mode within 14. As of writing this, there are 3 Deep Dungeons available, with another to be released probably by the time you're watching this video. These are multi-floor procedurally generated dungeons. Depending on the Deep Dungeon, you start at a certain level, begin to level up, and climb your way out, progressing floor by floor. Surviving the floors becomes harder as you climb, and every 10th floor is capstoned with a little boss fight. And of course, there's some sort of story surrounding each Deep Dungeon as well. There's actually a little community that's blossomed around Deep Dungeons. These are people who are trying to clear Deep Dungeons solo, which in itself is probably one of the greater challenges that this game has to offer. Variant and Criterion dungeons. Variant dungeons are branching path kind of dungeon crawls that you will have to do multiple times to explore and unlock every route. Your progression changes based on your actions and random events, and boss mechanics will vary depending on your earlier choices. Criterion dungeons are just harder versions of the variant dungeons, maybe comparable to extremes or some of the weaker savages found in the game. For you story buffs, there's definitely some cool lore drops found in these variant dungeons though. Treasure maps. Treasure maps can be obtained through gathering and other means. These are fun little usables that allow you to potentially open up a portal to a zone where you fight and progress through in order to obtain treasure. There are lots of fun little rewards to be found here, even some rare ones. They're not very difficult, definitely more RNG based, but a good way to spend your time. Blue Mage. The Blue Mage is a limited job that functions independently of the other main combat ones. This job can't really participate in typical group content, but comes with its own story and progression system. Blue Mages learn skills from their enemies, and in doing so, gain access to a whole host of new and fun skills. Blue Mages have access to the Masked Carnival, a series of solo combat challenges, as well as a bunch of achievement challenges centered around clearing raids in a full party of Blue Mages. I haven't explored this part of the game too much, but I know we are getting a future update for another job of a similar style called the Beastmaster. Squadrons. Squadrons allow players to take direct command of soldiers who they can deploy on missions, train, and upgrade. Recruited soldiers have their own jobs and roles, as well as a stat pool and passive bonuses. You can send them on missions passively, as well as jump in and command your own little squadron through various early game dungeons. PvP. Okay, before I talk more about the other non-combat PvE extracurriculars this game has to offer, I did want to talk to you about PvP. I think PvP could be a major factor for a lot of people when choosing an MMO. Now, while 14 is not necessarily known for its player versus player content, I do know there exists amongst the player base a smaller but strong group of PvP enjoyers. So here's how PvP works. There is no open world PvP. There are no factions. Your gear and level doesn't matter for PvP. Once you have it unlocked, you're on the same playing field as everyone else. For PvP modes, you have a new and smaller ability kit. These are specific to player versus player only and tend to be based off the effects of their PvE counterparts, but just balanced for a player versus player setting. This was something I was sort of divided on when I first started playing. Back when I played WoW, gear mattered, your level mattered, of course, for overall power and abilities, and you had the same actions as you would in PvE. On one hand, it felt good knowing that spending time on my character in PvE would have some carryover to PvP. On the other hand, with everything leveled to an even playing field as it is in 14, it truly does just come down to skill versus skill. Like, you could be relatively new to the game and beat somebody who has been playing this for their whole life simply because you're better. And there's literal merit to that. As nice as having PvE achievements carrying over to PvP sounds, I also realized that at this point in my life, and with the way I play games, I would not be that dude with the epic gear stomping battlegrounds. I would be on the receiving end if that were the case. So make of it what you will, but it's something you should be aware of if this interests you. So PvP is centered around 3 different game modes. You have Crystalline Conflict, Frontlines, and Rival Wings. Crystalline Conflict is the main PvP mode and seems to be what the developers spend most of their time updating and balancing around. This is a 5 vs 5 push the crystal into your opponent's goal while trying to prevent them from pushing it into your goal sort of mode. There's a bunch of different arenas, some of them with environmental effects, and this mode has a casual and ranked queue. So this is the mode you will have to play if you want any competitive PvP in this game. For the ranked mode, there are seasons that you will compete in been periods of time where you are eligible to rank up. As of writing this, we are just wrapping up season 15, heading into season 16 at some point. As a lifelong PvP enjoyer, I have dabbled in ranked for a couple of seasons, seasons 1, 2, and 12. I was able to reach the highest rank in each season, which is Crystal rank, though they are updating the mode with 2 more tiers of higher ranks. My experience in general was pretty good, but alluding to the popularity of PvP within 14, I noticed that the queues tend to slow down and kind of die by a certain point every season for the ranked mode. If you're at or near the highest rank, you'll still find people trying to queue and get matches, but at a certain mid to low rank threshold, the queues were pretty much dead. Like in season 12, I had a friend sitting around gold tier who couldn't find a ranked match even when queued for like 4 hours. Again, this was more towards the tail end of a season, but you'll always be able to find a casual match. FYI, there is no group matchmaking in ranked, solo queue only. For casual players, one of their newest updates will allow you to duo queue. The next PvP mode is Frontlines. This is a casual capture and hold areas of interest type of mode. There are 72 players split into 3 teams of 24, so it gets kind of wild. I've done quite a few Frontline matches in my day. I have fun with them. Always been a fan of large scale PvP battles. You're gonna run into a wide range of skill levels here for sure, and you're able to queue in as a group of 4 max. Rival Wings is the third PvP mode. This one is a MOBA-esque styled system where each team is trying to destroy the base of their opponents. There are lanes where NPCs constantly spawn in to push, as well as objectives on the map to control and win over stronger NPCs to your side. You gotta break these towers to push into the base, typical MOBA style, except we get to pilot big ass Gundams. Honestly, this is a really fun mode, but I haven't heard the developers talk about this like ever. So no updates, no new stuff here. I think this mode is kind of dead. Like I have to transfer to a certain server in order to get queues for this, which is a shame because I really do like this one. So while PvP isn't necessarily the focus of 14, there's a dedicated community surrounding it. The devs will hold official Crystalline conflict tournaments here and there, and I definitely see community organized events being held from time to time as well. It's just not as prevalent as you might find in other MMOs. The PvP itself feels fine. It doesn't feel as snappy as say World of Warcraft, and there's this really specific issue of not being able to accurately click on actual characters on my screen. This is a proven problem in 14. It's not as intuitive as in other MMOs. Quick tip, definitely take a look at your tab targeting settings and tailor those to your needs, and also rebind another key to target closest enemy. Okay, that's PvP. Let's get back to everything else. There's more I wanted to bring up. This will be a bit more random as these ideas come to me, but we'll focus on other non-combat player versus environment type of shenanigans. Character creation, expression, and identity. I didn't really talk about character creation or expression in the beginning because I felt like the other systems that we discussed were more critical to understanding if 14 might be the game for you. 14 has some decent options for you at character creation, definitely more robust than I've seen in some other MMOs, but it's not crazy in depth either. But I think where this game shines is in player expression. There's a huge variety of gear, and in 14 terms, glamour that you can obtain to style yourself. And while the system around this is kind of janky, it's kind of a hassle to organize, it's still one of my favorite parts of the game. Not because I'm some sort of fashionista, but I love running into other players in the world and seeing how they decided to dress and express themselves. And while this is a fantasy game, you'll find a ton of different clothing styles and genres to mess around with. This is a part of the game that could maybe be considered endgame for some people. People love collecting their glamours and creating new outfits to wear, and I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of cool options and combinations that I've seen. A lot more creativity than I've ever shown. Crafting and gathering. I don't have too much experience with crafting and gathering. I actually only have one gathering job unlocked, the Fisher, but I already know that 14 is pretty different from other MMOs when it comes to their crafting and gathering. First of all, just like combat jobs, crafting and gathering jobs come with their own story as well. Like you gotta progress that story to learn certain skills as you level. And I hear that there's some pretty good narrative to be found here. The next biggest difference is in the way that crafting and gathering works. For most games that I played in and outside the MMO space, crafting and gathering is usually just a point and click sort of endeavor. That's not the case in 14. There are skills and actions that you have to use to accomplish your task. Like this is me fishing here. Look at my hotbars. There's a lot going on. I have buttons to do different kinds of casts and hooks, abilities that affect the potential size or type of fish that I want to catch. I have my own little mana bar or GP bar here to manage all of these abilities. There's a million different kinds of bait to choose from, and depending on my location and the time of day and the weather, certain fish may or may not be available. And that's just fishing. I can only imagine what the other gatherers and crafters are like. There's some depth here that I haven't seen in other games. The game also offers these crafting and gathering hubs where players work together and contribute to server-wide progression. For example, the current iteration of this is called Cosmic Exploration. We're basically working together to build up this little extraterrestrial hub. You take on gathering and crafting missions to contribute and slowly make progress, and you can see the thing build up as time progresses. I'm not sure how often these pop up in the development cycle. This is the first one I've truly participated in since my time playing. Beast Tribes. Beast Tribes are your reputation grinds in this game. Each expansion offers a variety of allied societies to do daily quests with in order to earn experience, money, and other rewards. These are mostly combat-based quests, but each expansion has at least one allied society related to gathering and crafting. These are super easy to complete. You can do 12 daily quests per day and accept up to 3 quests from one faction at a time. I feel like these usually take like 5 to 10 minutes to do. The Gold Saucer. The Gold Saucer is an in-game amusement park filled with tons of little mini-games to participate in, as well as special rewards to obtain. I suppose this would be akin to, say, a Dark Moon Fair in World of Warcraft, except this is a permanent fixture. The area uses its own currency that you can exchange for rewards, currency obtained through a myriad of ways, from these little arcade games to actual events that pop up periodically in the zone. The Slice is Right is one of my favorites, shown here, and I do enjoy me a Leap of Faith from time to time. There is a weekly lottery system that you can buy tickets for and possibly receive a tremendous amount of MGP, the currency of the zone. Here's the fashion report, where you are challenged with dressing up to a weekly theme before presenting yourself for judging. We got this little arcade battler called Lord of Verminion, where you basically assemble an army utilizing minions that you've collected throughout the game and battle either other players or NPCs and participate in tournaments. There's Mahjong, actual straight up competitive Mahjong, including its own ranking system. I hear there are dedicated communities who play Final Fantasy XIV just for the Mahjong. Then you got Chocobo Racing. You're not only racing here, but also training, leveling, and eventually breeding your own Chocobos. As you continue to breed higher ranked Chocobo, the races become harder and harder. And then we have Triple Triad. If you played Final Fantasy games before, then you are familiar with this card game. Not only are there a ton of different rule sets that you might recognize from iterations that you played, there's a ton of cards that can be found from playing the game itself. This includes battling NPCs around the world or completing various PvE content drops such as dungeons and trials. You can also challenge other players and participate in tournaments. I really like the Gold Saucer and have spent a lot of time in here before. I don't recall the devs ever talking about the Gold Saucer during my time playing this game, so no updates, which is unfortunate because I really do enjoy this zone. Hildibrand. Hildibrand adventures are a line of quests following the antics of one Inspector Hildibrand and his entourage. The quest lines can be found throughout almost every expansion and are tied to numerous rewards and even relic weapons. This is definitely a different experience from the main game. I feel like players either really love this storyline, like I do, or truly despise it. Island Sanctuary. 14 also has a similar hub, not necessarily related to the crafting and gathering jobs, called Island Sanctuary. It's more of a cozy lifestyle sort of content drop where you collect resources, grow crops, build up your own little island. There's a linear progression here, so you're not customizing like in The Sims or Animal Crossing, but it's a different change of pace from the hustle and grind of the typical game. The consensus around this mode is it got old a little bit fast, but I actually appreciate the devs for trying something new like this. Housing. Final Fantasy XIV does have a housing system. These are instance houses in an instance neighborhood. Some people joke around that the true endgame of 14 is obtaining a house because it's very difficult to own one. There's a limited amount of houses to be had, and to own one, you have to not only have the required guild to purchase a plot, you have to enter a lottery against other players interested in that same plot. It's difficult enough to obtain a house that some players are kind of held hostage to it. They keep their monthly subscription going in order order to keep their house, which would otherwise be demolished and open for lottery if the owner was inactive for a certain amount of time. There's different house sizes and neighborhood themes depending on where your plot is. There's also these apartment complexes for the poors. I don't personally own a house, but I do have this free company house or guild house that I share with Sorrel. Sorrel is the landlady here. I'm not allowed to touch anything outside of my room. Here's my room. But yeah, there's actually a huge creative world here when it comes to houses. I've seen some crazy decorated aesthetic ones during my time. Some people even hold social and RP gatherings at their venues, which is a perfect segue into some of the social and community aspects of this game. Guilds, or free companies. Guilds do exist in 14, but here they are known as free companies. These function very much like any guild feature you might be used to, with some cool stuff added on. You can level your guild and earn currency, which you can use to purchase guild-wide buffs and furniture. If you do own a free company house, then members of your free company, or FC, can live together in communal areas and with their own private rooms. There's this interesting little airship and submarine voyage thing found in FC houses, kind of a little mini game of sorts where you can earn materials and items as well. And as I alluded to earlier on in the rating section, what's interesting about this game is while players have their free companies, they often raid with a separate static. If you remember that term I threw out earlier. In my traditional MMO experience, I had a guild and I raided with that guild. But here in 14, it's not uncommon at all for players to have their social free company and keep an entirely separate raiding static on the side. Pretty interesting, doesn't really affect anything though. Community and social aspects. The Final Fantasy XIV community as a whole is pretty damn good. Like in the grand scheme of other MMOs and online games, 14 can feel like a safe haven. There are systems in place in the game that sort of foster this positive spirit. For example, new players get hit with this sprout icon, which basically shouts to the rest of the world that you're fresh off the boat, and other players are generally very patient and forgiving and kind with sproutlings and each other. I mentioned earlier that there's this duty roulette system that incentivizes all players, but also veteran players to queue into and possibly help out some sprouts in a dungeon or boss fight with the incentive for extra rewards, especially for first-time clears. There's a player commendation system. You can give a thumbs up to somebody after a dungeon or something if you feel like they deserve it, though I tend to give mine to people with interesting player portraits. And while I personally haven't run into bad eggs, I know they exist. That's the nature of being in an online space or just existing in the world. You're gonna run into some people who just suck. But as I always say, if you're a decent person with a healthy relationship to gaming, social media, online media, whatever, chances are you're gonna find yourself surrounded by other decent people, way more often than not. And while players of this game can show toxic traits in different ways, maybe in a more toxically positive, overprotective sort of way when it comes to 14, as a whole, it's a great place to be. And there's a lot of community camaraderie to be found within the game itself, like player-driven events and initiatives. I remember one Halloween, I went to some random ass Halloween party. People were just hanging out and dancing, and it was kind of fun. My friend Sorrel is part of the Eorzean Aquarium, a group dedicated to building aquariums across data centers to show off all the fish in the game. They host events from time to time and are even part of a greater museum network of sorts. And then there's like straight up cons being organized and put on by players in the game. They have panels and events and other shit. I never actually went to one, but it sounds really dope. I know that there are role-playing groups that exist as well, and if you really want to get down and dirty, there's definitely some avenues for that more erotic roleplay. Like, I'm kind of laughing as I'm saying this, but there's definitely the possibility that the ERP community outnumbers, say, the PvP community. That's just kind of the game that this is. But hey, you do you. I don't pay your sub. Don't worry, we'll talk about monetization later. Basically, every subsect of content that I've mentioned, or may have forgotten to mention, has some sort of community blossoming around it. From PvP to the solo deep dungeoners and museum folks that I talked about earlier, to glamourers, housing aficionados, musical and performance groups, groups that run people through older raids or content, groups that help people clear current raids, even the ultimates. There's people who play this game just for the mahjong. I know there's a fishing community. I participated in one of their events. And of course, there are achievement hunters and leaderboards surrounding the wide variety of accomplishments found in this game. You pick a niche, you can most definitely find a group that's about that life. Lastly, outside of the game, there is a fan fest dedicated to 14. I haven't been to one yet. I think it'd be cool to experience it at some point though, but they sell out really fast. And yeah, you'll find 14 events and booths at gaming conventions and whatnot. I don't have much experience with these, but there is a presence. Music! I've hinted at the music a bit here and there, but I believe it deserves its own section. The music is that good. And the catalog diversity is huge. There's a music track for every mood, theme, or moment going on in and outside the story, dungeons, boss fights, etc. And it's not like the music is just there to accompany the visuals or provide ambient noise. Just like any piece of media, audio design is huge, and it can be a driving force for any scene or moment. As I've said, if you're familiar at all with Final Fantasy games, you have an idea of what you might be getting into, but if you're not familiar, you're in for a nice surprise. It goes so far as even the music director of 14, Soken, leads a band called the Primals, the official band of Final Fantasy XIV, the game. You'll hear tons of crossover between their music and what is present in the game. If you're interested in sampling some of the in-game music, you could find a bunch of playlists on Spotify, like official playlists from Soken himself or Final Fantasy XIV and the Primals. Events, crossovers, and other Final Fantasy games. How does 14 fit into the grand scheme of things? Just like any Final Fantasy game, 14 is set in its own contained storyline and world, but the spirit of the FF universe as a whole persists. Chocobos, Moogles, materia, and more, it's going to feel very familiar. But because this is an MMO, we have the luxury of having callbacks to names and locations, and the retelling of events and storylines and running jokes molded into the very fabric of 14. From straight up event crossovers with Final Fantasy XVI to zones based off Final Fantasy IX to an entire Alliance Raid series inspired by tactics. As of writing this, the current Alliance Raid series is a callback to Final Fantasy XI, you know, that other MMO. Plus, there's a bunch of other little crossover events and content drops related to other games, like Fall Guys, or Monster Hunter, or even Nier. That's right, there's an entire raid series based off Nier. And there are official in-game events held throughout the year pretty frequently. A lot of these are holiday based, usually comes with some sort of casual story and new items, just a bit of flavor to add to the world, but I always like these events, as simple as they tend to be. Accessibility, controllers, and mods. You have some options when it comes to making your game more accessible. The game has full-on controller support and crossplay between PC and PlayStation. I use mouse and keyboard, but I know plenty of folks who love using controllers, even up through high-end content. I've always heard that it's pretty intuitive, and it kind of looks that way when I see footage of players using it. You can also resize and customize your HUD, including placement and size of objects. You can scale windows up or down outside of your HUD settings as well. There are some options here for colorblind folks. I do have a colorblind friend who says that these settings are pretty adequate. I think that might be it as far as native accessibility options. Now, I'm sure there's mods out there to help with some other issues, but mods are definitely a sensitive topic with the developers. Basically, they don't like us using them, but as long as you're not really showing them off on stream or online, then you won't really get into trouble. I think they try to provide as much as possible to deter the usage of mods. In raiding, for example, plenty of raiders will run mods like damage trackers, but from my perspective looking in, it doesn't seem like people's screens are cluttered and littered with add-ons like you might see in other MMOs. Ironically, there's this running joke that the devs will ban creators or users of certain quality of life mods only for them to finally implement what those mods were trying to fix in the first place. For example, they just announced that we'll be getting chat bubbles in the game at some point. That's right, there's currently no chat bubbles, but rest assured, you can bet that there's definitely a mod out there right now that adds chat bubbles into the game. Rest in peace to the creator of that mod. Thank you for your sacrifice. Monetization. Okay, let's talk monetization, but real quick, here's another reminder that this game has a generous free trial. Final Fantasy XIV is a buy-to-play and pay-to-play game. You would have to buy either the latest expansion or some sort of combination of base game plus relevant expansions or complete edition set. And on top of that, there is a monthly or annual subscription to pay, about $13 to $15 per month, depending on your subscription length. My recommendation is to play the free trial, and once you know that you want to play this game for sure, go buy the complete edition. There is a cash shop filled with accessories, clothing items, mounts, emotes, furniture, etc. I think a lot of these items were obtainable through old events and whatnot at some point. I feel like those tend to get thrown on the cash shop eventually once those events are discontinued, but pretty much optional stuff here. There are story skips that will bring you to the start of the current expansion, so if you're somebody who definitively knows you don't want to progress the story but want to get to the end game, there's options for that. Looks like you'd still have to to progress the current expansion story though, and the story skip doesn't necessarily level your character or jobs, but don't worry, they have a level skip for you to buy for that as well. Of course they do. And while I feel like they can be kind of greedy with the prices on the shop here, it's your money. I never really bought anything from here, but I'm gonna guess that a lot of people are making purchases given what seems to be high prices in my opinion. So what is the current state of Final Fantasy XIV? Final Fantasy XIV definitely sits in an interesting spot amongst its MMO brethren. It's definitely a journey or story first kind of game, even though there's plenty of shenanigans to get into in the end game. In fact, this is how the developers often talk about 14. They talk about this being a game that wants to respect your time and isn't trying to hit you with that FOMO. They literally talk about wanting you to take breaks from 14. This is actually a discussion topic amongst veteran players. There's currently a lot of discourse about the kind of content, quality of content, and cadence of content being released. Due to its nature, this is a game that's trying to cater to a lot of different types of MMO players. Storygoers, PvPers, raiders, casual, midcore, hardcore. It's a bit of a conundrum trying to balance all of this without leaving a certain player base feeling left out. On one hand, this is a game made for everyone, but on the other hand, something made for everyone sometimes feels like it's made for no one. 14 is also an old game, one that the player base will describe as built on spaghetti code. The devs often refer to this old code as a limitation for implementing quality of life or other updates that just seem really reasonable to have by this point in its life cycle. The friends list, for example, is really jank and takes a millennia to load in. And of course, there's some other topics up for discussion that I mentioned earlier: homogenization of jobs, 2-minute windows, rewards and progression, etc. So the expansion that we're currently in is Dawn Trail. The previous expansion, Endwalker, was pretty much the culmination of that decade-long story that I alluded to earlier. So Dawn Trail is the beginning of the next big arc. It's setting the stage. And with that comes a wide range of expectations, as well as a lack of that constant familiarity that we found ourselves tethered to in previous expansions. Dawn Trail was met with a really mixed reception, partly in due to the story, partly in due to the content. And sometimes it can feel difficult to weed through the plethora of polarizing opinions from people who overprotect this game from any criticism and people who are just straight spiteful. There's definitely a nice middle ground conversation that can be found, so whether you are a new player or a current player, I implore you to stick to your guns. If you find this game fun, keep on having fun, and don't let the opinions of others sour your experience. And on the flip side, something fun will still have its flaws. I think it's important to voice our opinions, but if you find yourself engulfed in a constant state of dourness, then maybe that's a sign to switch things up. Because while we can hope for change, and while change may come for better or for worse, the one thing we can definitely change is how we choose to spend our time. Again, at the risk of sounding too critical, I just wanted to make you aware of some of the very real discussions and feelings brewing amongst the player base. But if you're straight up new to this game, or somebody with similar gaming habits to me, there's a million things to get lost in and enjoy in Final Fantasy XIV. If there's one development team that I truly believe loves and respects their game, it's this development team. I just think there might be some issues with the company managing this team and the game. Should you play Final Fantasy XIV? I don't know. You tell me. Based off of everything I just said, should you play Final Fantasy XIV? Ultimately, the best way to figure this out is hop in the game and try it. And here's your final reminder that the game offers a very generous free trial. You can get a lot of game time in with some restrictions to the social aspects of the game. Throughout it all, I've spent the past 4 years playing Final Fantasy XIV. I have had a ton of fun. I've made a lot of friends and incredible memories. I'm invested in the story. It's great, not just for an MMO, but it's great despite being an MMO. If you think about it, MMOs are never really supposed to end, which sounds like unlimited potential for a narrative, but in my opinion, it's a limiting factor. I think a story should end, otherwise we get 20 seasons of the same slop over and over again. Going on a bit of a tangent here. I have fun with the combat. I think the boss fights and raids feel like a spectacle across the board. To me, 14 is more than just the story or the gameplay. For me, it's the world that I play in and the people that I play with. I'm actually taking a bit of a break from 14, playing other games for a change of pace, and I don't feel guilty about that at all. I'm refreshed and ready for the next patches. Everybody, thank you for giving me the honor of your most valuable resource of all, your time. Come find us live on Twitch or on this YouTube channel. Check out my other channel for non-MMO related shenanigans. Should you play Final Fantasy XIV? Yeah, why not? Give it a shot. And if you end up sticking around, come find me in game, come say hi, leave a comment if you have any other questions or concerns not addressed addressed in this video, I'll do my best to answer. See you in the next one. Peace out. Bye-bye.